I'm Dianne McKenna, and I was on the Board of Supervisors from 1984 until January of 1997. I had previously been on the Sunnyvale City Council when I decided to run for the Board of Supervisors. What got me into politics was that I had a master's degree in urban and regional planning from San Jose State. And I thought what I really wanted to do was be a planning commissioner. So I applied for the planning commission in the city of Sunnyvale, and I was turned down twice. And I had an opportunity to see who my competition was, and I realized that politics was a very competitive process. And so I said, you know, I'm not going to be a planning commissioner. I should run for the city council. And so I had some citizen support and broad-based support in the city, and I ran and I won the first time, which was quite lucky. And so I spent 8 years, just about 8 years on the Sunnyvale City Council, and decided that 8 years was very productive, and I'd like to then try my hand at the county level. And so District 5 seat was open, and so I ran for District 5, which included 8 cities, basically in the northern part of the county, starting in Palo Alto and coming down through Mountain View, a part of Sunnyvale, Cupertino, Los Altos Hills, Saratoga, and Monte Sereno. You know, when I ran for office, there were 3 areas that I was particularly interested in. I was interested in land use and transportation, obviously because of my urban planning background. And then the third area, because of my experience in, with children, was in children's or social services. So those areas that I found that I had my most significant contribution tended to fall in those areas. At the time that I got on the Board of Supervisors, there was a proposal to double the density of development in the hillside. And so when I got on the board, I talked to my fellow board members and said, I would like to do kind of a vision for the county about what development is going to look like in 2020. So we called it Vision 2020, and came back with recommendations that the much earlier proposal that density be doubled in the hillside, in fact, not be doubled, and we stay within the framework of the general plan. So I considered that a major accomplishment in the land use. The second land use issue that I think was of particular concern was we then, many years later, in 1995, we then had to do an update of the general plan. And of course, in 1995, there were tremendous pressures again for growth and development. And we had a really broad-based committee from people from all walks of life. And we came back with what I thought was a very good compromise in many areas that still protected the land but allowed some development. So I felt like my second greatest accomplishment, at least in the land use area, was the general plan revision. On the transportation side, there were a lot of things happening in transportation when I was on the Board of Supervisors. Most notably, Supervisor Dianne had talked about, you know, the trolleys and, you know, light rail. But at the same time, there was a lot of money coming down for congestion management because everyone was complaining about congestion on the roads. And so the state gave money for congestion management. And I brought together a group of people, and we had, Santa Clara County had the first congestion management agency in the county, and I was proud to be a part of that. And then following up on the congestion management agency, when I ran for office, one of the things that had been discussed was to remove the Board of Supervisors from the transit districts, because when I first got on the Board of Supervisors served also as the Transit District Board. And the state had been looking into a number of issues because they thought that the county wasn't doing as good a job as it should be as a transit district. Well, I also thought that there should be a separate board for transit for transit and transportation. But it's one of those things, as in politics, that you have to wait for the right timing. So even though I was elected in 1984, it wasn't until we had the Congestion Management Agency, till we had the other cities involved, that we were able to talk about merging the Congestion Management Agency with what later became the VTA. And so the Board of Supervisors would no longer be the Transit District Board, but it would be members from the Board of Supervisors, but also members from cities would also serve on that. So I felt my second greatest accomplishment in the field of transportation was the establishment of the VTA in Santa Clara County. On a regional-wide perspective, I was one of the founding members of the Caltrain Joint Powers Board. And back in the early 90s, the state was running the Caltrain service. And the state said that they would no longer run it. And so there was state legislation to see if there couldn't be a body to take over the running of the Caltrain service. And so the three counties, San Francisco, San Mateo, and Santa Clara County, came together and jointly formed a Joint Powers Authority to run the Caltrain service. So that was another issue in transportation that I particularly felt was a good accomplishment to keep that service going, and I was one of its founding members. When I look at children's issues, I feel my greatest accomplishment was the building of a new children's shelter for abused and neglected children. There had been an old shelter that had received a lot of notoriety for the fact that it was overcrowded, the roof was leaking, and it just wasn't a facility that you wanted children to live in while they were waiting for permanent placement. And so through a public-private partnership, we built a new shelter to the tune of about $13 million out on Union Avenue, and I think that was a really great accomplishment. And the reason I say that is because when we moved the children in from the old shelter to the new shelter, I overheard one of the children say, "Boy, somebody must really care about us to build something like this." And that made it all worthwhile. Another project that I was particularly proud of was the Library Joint Powers Authority. I had most of the county libraries within my supervisorial district, and the state was beginning to cut back funding on special districts. And so we couldn't rely on the state funding, and yet there wasn't much county funding for the libraries. And I felt very passionate about libraries. So I brought together the city managers of all the cities who had a county library, with the exception of San Jose, because although we did involve representatives from San Jose, the city manager wasn't interested in participating at that particular time. So we had the city managers and the mayors and myself, and we sat down and we said, we've got to figure out a way to fund all the libraries, because it looked as though if the funding was going to go away, we might have to close one. We said our goal is not to close any libraries. So we put a ballot measure on, I believe it was about, again, 1995-96, for a benefit assessment district, and that passed in the communities. And not only were we able to save the libraries, but we were able to do some needed repairs in the libraries, and in some cases do a little bit of expansion. So that was really rewarding for me to see the libraries that were saved during my term. And lastly, one of those things that is not kind of interesting to talk about was solid waste management. And when I became chair of the countywide solid waste committee, I was really pleased that we were able to start countywide recycling of Christmas trees, phone books, and what's called sharps, the needles that people use for when they need to give themselves injections for allergies or diabetes or any other type of illness. So we, rather than having those sharps go into our landfills, we started a pilot program, and I'm pleased to see that that still continues today. So that was kind of not as known a project, but that summarizes most of the things that I worked on during my term in office. Well, I think when you run for office, that you run with an idea of what you want to accomplish. And on the road to accomplishing what you've set out to achieve, you find that there are issues that come to you that you really didn't want to have to deal with, but it's your responsibility to deal with them. And so they can take over a lot of your time and a lot of your effort. And I had two in particular that posed not only to me, but my fellow board members. This was one of those issues where all of us had to deal with it, but it took all of our time. And that was when I got on the Board of Supervisors. There was already in existence a lawsuit against the county for overcrowding at the jails, and it was called the Branson case. And at the time, the county was beginning to build a brand new jail, which is right across now. It sits right across from the county offices, and it's an 11-story building. But the judge in that case said that we were not building single cells fast enough. And he said we had to come up with another alternative while that jail was being built for single cells. And we went to court, and the judge threatened to put us in jail if we didn't respond to it. Luckily, when the judge did find that we didn't respond to his order, we were able to get a stay so that we wouldn't go to jail immediately, that we could have that case, have his decision challenged before we were actually sent to jail. And once another judge heard the case, saw what we were building, saw what we were trying to do, he overturned that judge's decision. But that was a very scary thing and difficult thing to deal with, because I really felt that all of us were doing what we possibly could, but at the same time we were looking at potentially going to jail. So that was a very scary and difficult issue. And then I had one other difficult issue that was more my issue than it was a board issue. And that was when I was on the Caltrain JPB, the state agreed to build a maintenance facility for the Caltrain service, and they were going to build it in San Jose. And I went to the mayor and council in Santa Clara and the mayor in San Jose, and I said, is this the site where you want to build this maintenance facility? Is this the site? Because there were other sites we were looking at. And I didn't want to, since I was on the Board of Supervisors, I felt that I needed to communicate with the cities where this may be in their jurisdiction or cross some of their boundaries. They assured me that this would be the case. Well, the state is very slow in moving, and so I basically worked every 6 weeks. I would force a meeting of Caltrains, the state, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and the Caltrains representatives, and we would all go and meet about building this maintenance facility. And just as we were getting to where we could agree on what percentage of funding would come from the state, what percentage would come from locals, and all of this, I thought, you know, I should go back to the cities, because this, about a year and a half had elapsed. I should go back to the cities and just check to make sure we're still all on the same page. And when I went back to the two respective cities, they said, no, 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 we don't want that site anymore. We've got plans for that. And so I looked at close to 2 years' work basically gone. And I don't believe to this day that a maintenance facility has been built in this county for the Caltrain service. But I mean, those things happen, and that was one that I had put a lot of time and effort into that just didn't pan out. Well, I think what people should know about the county is that basically the county government is an arm of the state. And so all the services that the state provides or funds, the county provides locally. So when you look at health services, you look at social services, you look at criminal justice services, you look at library services, you look at all of those issues that the state provides our funds are really what the county does. And most people, unless you find yourself in trouble, most people don't come into using county services, and they don't understand county government. But there are some services that we all use, like the parklands, and I'm particularly happy about the Park Charter Fund measures that we passed so that we can provide county parks. Registrar of Voters is something that we should all be using in services. And then marriage licenses and things you can get at the county. Those are the things that I remember why people come to the county, usually for on happy occasions. But I think that county government to a large degree isn't as well understood as city government or as the state government. But it really provides a lot of services, and it really touches people's lives in a different way than city services do. And I really enjoyed my time on the Board of Supervisors.